Perfect. So we'll get started and look forward to everyone else joining us. Thank you all to our audience for joining us today here at ELI and on the web. A big welcome to the Environmental Law Institute. My name is Caitlin McCarthy and I'm the Director of the Associates Program here at ELI. You've joined us for an Introduction to Careers in Environmental Law and Policy, the first session kicking off ELI's annual summer school series. We're delighted to welcome everyone here today to ELI and on the web, and I encourage you to follow our events page on our website, eli.org, for future summer school seminars and other events. For our audience members on GoToWebinar, please submit your questions by submitting it through GoTo's question box, and please do not hold your questions at the end. Send them as soon as you think of them. For our audience members, we will have time for a Q&A at the end of the panel. I'd like to thank our wonderful panel for being here today to introduce participants to the many career options in the realm of environmental law and policy and beyond. Their career journeys, current work, and role in environmental law and policy are diverse and significant. Full speaker bios are posted on our website, www.eli.org, and each panelist will share more about their path with you today. So with that, I'd like to let Colby Bishop of National Geographic start us out, and we'll go through the panel. Thanks for joining us.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Caitlin. As she said, my name is Colby Bishop. I am the Director of Wildlife Programs at National Geographic, which is just half a block down that way. If you guys haven't been there, we've got a great museum. You should come on in, check it out. A new Titanic exhibit just opened, actually. Yep. So I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about my background, how I got into National Geographic. I've worked there for about 11 years in July, which is hard for me to believe. Time flies when you're having fun, to say the least. And talk about challenges, exciting updates, and how environmental law fits into all of this, of course. So I'm from upstate New York originally. Actually, and I kind of a rural upstate part of New York near the Ithaca area. It's called Elmira, New York, where I'm from. When I was in third grade, someone from National Geographic, from the Maps division, it was somebody's family member, like an aunt, came to my third grade classroom and brought all of us these blow-up beach ball globes. This one I just tried to blow up, but they actually are better than this. And I loved the globe, and I was like so inspired by her and National Geographic. So oddly enough, that all comes full circle here as I'm holding this globe. So I actually still have the globe she gave us. They're very durable, I guess. It's at my parents' house at home. This is not the original globe, but it looks very similar. But when I started my career at National Geographic, the first thing I said was like, how much money do we have? When can I order globes to hand out to students? So anyway, that's the story behind this half-inflated globe. I went to college at Hamilton College, a small liberal arts school in upstate New York. I majored in world politics and Spanish. I was really interested in getting international experience, so I studied abroad in Chile for 6 months. Loved that. Was able to speak Spanish pretty fluently after that, so added Spanish as a second major. But the reason I chose world politics was that I really liked the idea of international relations and working with global partners, global audiences, that kind of thing. So after college, I was dead set on moving to DC. And now you guys are all here during the summer. It's a beautiful day now, but it is not all summer long. It gets pretty humid out. But anyway, regardless, so I moved to DC with some of my friends from college. We lived in a group house, had lots of fun, but I got a job, most importantly, at the RAND Corporation. RAND is a think tank. It's over in Pentagon City in Arlington, Virginia. I was an admin assistant to some of the researchers. It was a great first job. In college, I actually didn't have an internship like all of you smart people. I was a waitress at a local winery, and it was lots of fun. And actually, I would recommend, if any of you have a chance to ever wait tables, it gives you a great base in learning how to talk to people, learning how to deal with issues. You know, the same thing as working with a scientist and something goes wrong is, you know, as if somebody got like a steak that's way too rare or something. You just, but that you can fix that problem usually a little bit faster. But it was still a pretty valuable experience, and I think I still use those people skills. Everything I do is talking to people or working with partners. I think I still use those people skills today. So anyway, I got a job at RAND once I moved to DC. I worked there for about a year as an admin assistant to 5 of the researchers. It was a great first job. I learned like what it is like to be in an office, how to write an email, how to format a document, all of those important tasks that you have to do regardless of what level you are in an organization. If I'd wanted to stay on and get my PhD and be kind of in academia, that would have been a great place to stay and grow. But I decided I wanted to do more, more maybe program project related things. And all of a sudden, I remembered my trusty little globe that National Geographic was actually based in DC. So I started looking at jobs there, and I got a job as the coordinator of the Geographic project. So this was about 11 years ago now. The Geographic project it continues today, basically we were tracing human ancient ancestry. You guys have probably heard of like Ancestry.com and 23andMe and all of those. We were actually the first to have a consumer genetic testing kit. So we sold these kits, but then we also had a research component to the project. We had 12 different research centers around the world working with indigenous populations to actually collect the data because their DNA hadn't been mixed too much like all of ours for the most part. So that's actually the science that helps drive a lot of these consumer genetic kits today. So I was the coordinator on that project. We had the 12 research centers, and my job was just to keep them all happy, make sure they had everything they need, they had the money they needed, the equipment they needed. We'd have annual conferences every year in glamorous places all over the world, so there was some fun travel involved. My first day on the job was in Shanghai, actually, which was fantastic. I'd never been to China before, so that was a fun perk. And since then, kind of my role expanded. I got interested in working more on the marketing and communication side, so I did a lot of that for the Geographic project. Some additional programs started popping up as my boss's job kind of expanded to manage these large-scale programs. Then I started working on others as well. And as I kind of started to think about what do you want to do when you grow up, and if you ask me that question now, like I probably wouldn't be able to tell you the answer because I think it changes. But I really liked my boss's job, like overseeing these large-scale programs with multi-million-dollar projects and having clear outcomes that you are tasked with to achieve by X date. So I decided my background, going to a liberal arts school, I didn't have much of the business, like accounting, those kinds of classes. So I decided to go back to school part-time. I went to the University of Maryland and got my MBA. It was part-time, so I continued working in my role at Nat Geo and was going to school, like night school. It was a 3-year program, which is like, it's a lot of work, but you just do it, and my life like didn't end. I still have social life. So I did that, and it ended up being great. One of the perks of going part-time is that you still have a job when you're done with school, so that's great. You don't have that pressure. But also all the people that you go to school with, they all stayed in DC because they all also had jobs and a life here and all of that. So now I have this new network across DC working in all different disciplines. And so that's been a big benefit as well from coming out of that program. So after school, after I finished my MBA, my role did expand across programs. At that same time, there were quite a few changes at National Geographic. And so for example, it was one big organization when I started. And now we're 2 separate organizations. We have a nonprofit side, and that's where I sit in this like impact-oriented side, and then we have a full profit side. And that's like where the magazine is, the channel, probably a lot of what you guys are familiar with, the Instagram account, all of that's on the full profit side. We're all under one roof, but it's kind of an interesting setup, but it allows us as a nonprofit to really focus on the mission and on the impact side instead of magazine sales. So all of a sudden, the work that I was doing on this program side became what was most important to our executive and our CEO, which timed pretty well as I finished my MBA. So I all of a sudden became in charge of all of the wildlife programs. As in this role, I mentioned managing budgets is a big thing. I don't know if any of you have heard of logic models, but basically it's like a project strategy document as you're creating a program so that you make sure all the activities that you're working on lead to what you're trying to achieve, because it's really easy to get distracted and say, oh, like I want a globe because they're cool, but actually is this globe going to help me save big cats? Maybe, but you have to make sure that you have a clear pathway of how that's going to happen. I have a team of people. We're a matrixed organization, so there's some people that do report into me, but others that have like dotted lines, because the marketing team, for example, has responsibilities on some of these projects. So they have a budget line in my budget, and they're responsible for spending it. But in the end, I'm the one who's responsible for the full project. So it can be a little bit challenging managing those relationships, but it's just kind of the beast of National Geographic and how we're set up. Some of the projects that I manage. So I have, you may have seen, there's some posters outside. This project is called the National Geographic Photo Arc. Joel Sartori is a photographer with National Geographic. He's been a photographer with the magazine for like 30 to 40 years. He's been around for a while. He started taking pictures of all species in captivity, and he puts them against a white or black background, just like this, tries to capture the eyes of the animal. And the idea is that a lot of people haven't seen these animals in real life. And yes, you could go to a zoo and see them, but some people don't even have that opportunity. So we're trying to market biodiversity, market wildlife for people so they understand them, get to know them. He captures the eyes so that you might care. Sometimes they have expressions that like a human might make. So the idea is that you captivate people in this way, get them to care, and then change their behavior to actually save wildlife. A lot of these big wildlife programs that we have the science and research component, but then also a marketing kind of public engagement side. So this is the public engagement side, the photos to captivate people. He had a TV show actually last year on PBS. We had a big billboard campaign across the US, and actually that's what these posters are from. There's still some bus shelter stops around DC that have this, so keep your eye out, but it was a campaign from last summer, so a lot of them have changed over. But then we also give grants to species, to conservationists working on species in the photo arc that are at risk of extinction that might be lesser known, so maybe you've never heard of them before. But like the pangolin, for example, it's like this scaly armadillo-like animal that is highly trafficked illegally. So by investing and giving conservation grants to the pangolin, we have the photo, we can bring it to the forefront and get people to care. So it's the combination of the science and the public engagement that brings a lot of these programs together. In terms of challenges, I think probably the biggest challenge with National Geographic right now is change. And I think for me, it keeps things interesting. And I think that's a key thing is be open to change, because things will change. Don't get too comfortable in your role, because you never know what could happen. Right now, we are looking for a new CEO, and so hopefully once we get our new CEO on board, we'll feel like things are a little more stable. But ever since we kind of separated into two organizations, things have we're trying to figure out who we are and what we want to do. It is an exciting place to work, because I think probably the biggest perk of working there is the people. Everyone has different backgrounds, different interests. They've traveled all over the place. I'm going to Indonesia for in a few weeks. And there's 3 people on staff that have spent like years there. And so I'm grabbing coffee with all of them to say, okay, I have like 4 extra days. What should I do? You know, and they all have contacts there, and they can just set you up. So it's just like a great place to work. Everyone is there for the mission. So the people are great. In terms of environmental policy and law, I would say, because we are a neutral brand, National Geographic, a lot of people want to work with us, and we can get people to all come and play in the sandbox that maybe were working on the same thing before and maybe even conflicting with each other's efforts, but being neutral, we can get people to come together. So the biggest thing is partnerships. I'm constantly working with our legal team to draft up legal documents to get these people together. A lot of these projects are international conservation projects, so we're working with governments and talking about their environmental policy. One project, for example, that I'm working on now has to do with the Sumatran rhino. There's about less than 100 left in Indonesia right now, but the government of Indonesia technically owns all of their wildlife. So in order to do anything, we have to work really closely with the government and make sure we're following all of their environmental laws and all of their conservation laws. So that's definitely where I'm pulling on our legal team. I'm working very closely with them to get these agreements signed with the government, making sure that we're following all of their policies specifically. So that's a quick overview of what I do, and we'll take questions later.
Thanks, Colby. You're really cool. I'm Margot Conover. I'm the External Relations Manager at Fairtrade America. Have you guys heard of Fairtrade? Yes, a little bit. So we're a global certification for mostly food, but also some textiles and mining. And we work with brands to help certify their supply chains to make sure that from the farm or the mine or the factory where anything you're purchasing comes from, everything that's happening is as it should be. So I have a really fun job as the External Relations Manager of our U.S. office, one of 32 offices around the world, and working with about 1.7 million farmers and workers globally to help them get their needs met in their jobs, and also make sure that the practices of the corporations and businesses we're working with are respecting the environment as well as the people that work in their supply chains. So that sounds all very business speaky, but I promise I'm a down-to-earth normal person. My education path was a bit winding, and we were talking earlier about this, about how sometimes when you're thinking in these career panels, it seems like everybody's life is like do, and then it's a very straightforward path, but it's not true at all. So how I came to be in this role and following this career path was somewhat by accident. So I kind of realized a little bit too late in my undergraduate education at Christopher Newport University in Virginia, which is also a small liberal arts school, that I was interested in agriculture after having pursued political science and Spanish. And it wasn't sensing a theme. And it wasn't until my senior year, as I was writing my BA thesis, that I realized that a lot of the things that I was really interested in, like development policy and how U.S. foreign policy is engaging in Latin America in particular, is really has a lot of agriculture implications, especially for sustainability. So by that time, also, I had the exciting fortune to graduate right in the middle of the recession. So I thought, wow, I'm probably not going to get a job. I should go to grad school and give myself a little space to think and wait until things even back out. So I went to the University of Chicago to study international relations. And talking about meandering paths, I honestly don't know why they admitted me to this program, not for a lack of merit on my part, but because everyone else in my program was like, NATO, war, great power politics. And I was like, I like farms. So it was a really interesting experience to work with a lot of people that were just on a totally different wavelength from me, but to find a space within that where I was also getting my needs met. And at that time, because U Chicago is very well known for economics, I also found the only non-kind of Miltonian libertarian corner of the economics department in the form of my thesis advisor, and with him I worked on a sustainability in agriculture and economics thesis that looked at acai. It's a palm fruit that comes from the Amazon estuary that had just recently been introduced in the U.S. market for juice. So you guys may have seen it in like Stambazon was the first brand that brought it to the U.S. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. It's like business, it's environmental, it's sustainable development, working directly with these communities. It's got a conservation component. So I found myself getting real excited about that. By the time I graduated from there, the recession was still going strong. And I also began to have nightmares about having to work in an office. So I was like, why don't I just go somewhere and work in these environments that I'm so excited about? And a good friend of mine who's Ecuadorian was like, oh, I know this guy through the Ministry of Agriculture down there that I used to work with. Do you want to come work for my friend Carlos? And I was like, yeah, Carlos sounds great. So I ended up moving down there sight unseen to be broke somewhere else instead of in the States. and worked for 2 years with sugarcane, cacao, citrus, and coffee co-ops. And that was just like a total detour. My parents flipped out. They were like, "You're going to get murdered by drug lords." And I was like, "It's not the 80s. Like, you're up here. I need you to." So I moved down there and ended up working in particular with a sugarcane co-op that was on the pathway to organic and fair trade certification. And got to have a lot of really exciting opportunities to help the local community translate some of these policies and regulations that businesses wanted to see implemented on the farms into a language and pathway that made sense for the local community, that wasn't just a bunch of white people in Switzerland writing a 200-page document that was like, "You're bad because you use child labor and burn your trash," and like, instead of understanding the context in which this is taking place. And again, it was just like taking advantage of an opportunity and saying yes, and like being cool with being broke and dirty in South America instead of broke and clean at home. And there I found I really was extremely excited about and loved working in the field and on the agriculture side, but also got increasingly interested in the business side. I got to work with some pretty cool brands like Dr. Bronner's, the soap company, the Body Shop, a few coffee companies that were sourcing from down there, and really like loved being in this environment. But after 2 years of that, I was like, you know what sounds great? Working in an office. It's so clean and relaxing. So I decided to move back to the States and ended up having a brief detour into public health, where after having seen some of the health issues and the farmers that I was working with, and how people don't really divide our lives into these little boxes in the way that a lot of development sometimes does. And I was like, yeah, I can offer a perspective there. But after a few years of that and writing grants and not loving working in an office as much as I had fantasized about, I found I really wanted to get back into that fair trade world. So I transitioned to Fairtrade America. I just finished my 3-year mark a couple of weeks ago, so that was exciting. And I have really loved it since then. It's a great blend of caring about all of these different issues, and it really touches practically everything you can care about. If the environment is your thing, then we have really strong work with our farmers about climate change adaptation and mitigation, making sure that all the practices on the farm are really respectful of watersheds, that we don't use GMOs, not because of like an anti-science stance, but because of predatory behavior on the part of some of these ag companies towards small farmers. Or if you care about child labor, if you care about human rights, if you care about labor rights, you know, there's something in it for everyone. So in my current role, I would say that is both what's really exciting and what's challenging, because it requires a lot of, you need to like really be able to focus and bring clarity to these disparate issues. But I've really been able to do so much cool stuff. Like the way that I got connected with ELI was last fall, because we were doing an outreach to promote some of our climate change work. So I was doing a learning breakfast series called Toast a Climate Advocate, where we brought fair trade avocado toast and coffee to all of these organizations that work on climate or environmental policy, to be like, high five guys, you're the best, and share some of our work about how we're engaging with the issue as well. I love being able to have that kind of creativity and autonomy about how to engage and share these issues, but it is like really hard to choose because there's so many cool things to share and so many issues that are relevant. And the importance, I would say, of environmental law and policy related to my work is kind of encapsulated by this Wendell Berry quote that I really love. If you guys never read him, you should. It's awesome. That eating is an agricultural act, and it's one that we do 3 times a day at least. So if you care about food and you want to eat in the future, then you really need to care about environmental policy. In particular, it's a really interesting space for me to be in because we do work a little bit with some government policy, but we're primarily focused on changing corporate policy, either directly through engaging with businesses or through the trade associations that they belong to. That can be super impactful in the same way that changing a law is, because like if Target changes some of their sourcing policies, it has such a huge impact and touches so many people all over the world that it also not just changes Target supply chain, but it makes it a lot easier for smaller businesses to jump on that bandwagon with them. So our goal is to empower businesses to not have to choose between making money and being good. Like, they should be rewarded for being good, and they should not be rewarded for being bad. So we help them to have the information and resources that they need to do that, as well as helping consumers like you guys to have the information and resources to hold the businesses accountable. And that's really exciting, not just because of in and of itself, but it's also exciting because it touches everyone. We all eat. And we all have to wear clothes. So fair trade has space in it for just about everyone. And sustainability is an issue. It's one of the few bipartisan issues, truly. Some of our strongest supporters are like very right-wing libertarians, and some are very lefty. So there's something to care about for everyone, and it's not kind of like with National Geographic, it's not closed off based on any of your other political views, because everybody loves food. So I would say, if you don't remember anything else, remember that we all eat, and so we all need to care about the environment because of that. So thank you guys. I'm looking forward to your questions later.
Okay. So this no pressure act to follow. I'm Natasha V Garnett, and I'm from the American Public Health Association. We are the largest association of public health professionals worldwide. We have 50,000 regular members, and then we also have 50,000 affiliate members that are, we have affiliates in each state, and 2 in New York, 2 in California, and 1 in Puerto Rico as well. And I'll get more to APHA a little later and give some background on myself and then bridge those 2 stories together. So I went to Western Kentucky University for undergrad, and everybody all my life said, "You're smart. You should be a doctor." Well, not everybody says that I'm smart, but people said, you care about people, you should be a doctor. And I said, I do. I want to protect people's health. I want to be a doctor. So I was pre-med in undergrad, and I majored in biology and chemistry, and because that's what you do when you're pre-med, at least that's what I was told at the time. And I stuck with that throughout. But about halfway through my undergraduate experience, I began to feel a disconnect with medicine. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what to do about it, because I knew I cared about health, but there was a schism there. So went for it. I took the MCAT. I graduated, and I said, I don't think medicine is it for me. I don't know what to do with this. And spoke to my very wise mother. If you see her, tell her that I said she was right. She said, I said, I don't know what to do. And she said, what about public health? And I said, oh, that sounds good. What's that? And she said, I don't know. But she was right. Instead of listening to her, however, I went and I worked in industry for a few years, and I did research and development. So I used those chemistry and biology degrees, but I knew I was committed to health. In my interview, don't know why they hired me, but I'm glad they did. But in my interview, they said, so what do you want to do with this? They manufactured printers. And I said, I want to use printers to improve quality of life. And the interviewer said, and they hired me anyway, thank goodness. Well, pretty much, I think this may have been my first day, my first week there. When I got there, and this is not unusual for anyone that works in research, but my office was in a lab. Now, this is my first job out of undergrad, and I was like, hi, I don't understand why my office is in this laboratory. Okay, we'll deal with it. Then I became kind of hypersensitive to what was happening. It wasn't a lab that I used, it just happened to be where my office was. I used different laboratories. And I would see people come in the lab and they may operate with a chemical but not using the fume hood. And I'm like, what am I breathing? What am I exposed to? Hypersensitive. Disclaimer, this company is environmentally great. But as a new graduate, and you don't know what's going on, you get nervous. So I started looking up these chemicals, and some are teratogens, reproductive hazards, and then some are carcinogens. And I said, I don't know how I feel about working in this lab, and I'm doing spreadsheets, and people are using these things. So talked to my boss, and he said, okay, I'm going to move you to a regular office, which is what I wanted. I'm going to move you to a regular office, but first I want you to do an air sampling experiment, and I want you to report back out on your findings. And, if there is a big concern, then we need to do something about it. And that was my introduction to environmental health. It didn't have a face and a name to me at the time, but through that I found that I was very concerned with the health of the workers, and I was also very concerned with the health of the people on the fence lines of the industry. So long story short, did the air sampling experiment. We were not in danger. The levels were in like the parts per trillion range, stellar company, but I learned a lot in that. I think what made it was a teachable experience for me, and I'm glad I got something out of that. Put that out at the back of my mind. Went on to work there for several years, and that itch for health just kept coming back to me. So I started volunteering so I could fill that need. And in my volunteering experience, I met a woman with a PhD in public health, and then I remembered what my mom said. So I did a Google search, and next thing I know, I was off to grad school at University of Louisville. First public health class, I knew that was a fit for me. And I said, oh, I wish I had found this sooner, but I probably needed that time to appreciate it more, and also have those experiences in research and touch on environmental health to really inform what I wanted to do. I didn't have my first environmental health class until my second semester, but I was sold. Environmental, it's not everybody's niche. And so some of my classmates would go into class and fall asleep. And that's the one class I was like, tell me more. I've got questions for you. I didn't even need my little tricks to stay awake, Candy. Didn't need that to get through those classes. So I loved it, but I was hesitant about it. I never grew up seeing myself as an environmentalist. I never saw myself as a tree hugger. I knew I cared about the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. I was fearful that I would be going into a life of bug collecting, which I'm terribly afraid of. It's important. We need that. I'm horrified of it, however. Once I realized that it was bigger than that, I said, I think environmental health is a fit for me. So come close to graduation, and one of my professors, I won't give you the long story behind it, but they were very encouraging and somewhat of a strong arm, said you should really consider getting a PhD. I'd never been told that in my life, and I'd never thought of it. And I'm glad that I listened and allowed my arm to be twisted because it was a great fit. I stayed there and I went on to do my dissertation research around air pollution and heart disease, which was, once again, a perfect fit for me. I enjoyed that because the connections aren't obvious and overt. We can see air pollution and asthma and air pollution and COPD, things like that. But connecting it to heart disease, I love when I talk to people about it and you kind of see the light bulb go on over their heads. And so I did that. I stayed there for my PhD, and then I also stayed there for my postdoctoral fellowship to get some of our research papers out the door, get some more experience. My project was mostly around environmental epidemiology. During the program, one of my professors picked up on my interest in policy. He's like, are you really interested in doing lab bench research for the rest of your life, or are you interested in something more like policy? And I was like, policy, yes. And he said, well, maybe we can create a policy option for you, a policy route, because all the classes are, for the PhD program, very biochemistry, cell biology focused. And so I thought that was so exciting. There are classes at our law school that had environmental law, so I thought it was going to be great. It did not pass, did not go through. Our chair was insistent that if I wanted to be in environmental policy, I would be best served if I understood the science that supported policy. That was tough. I already had the degrees in biology and chemistry, so I didn't come in interested in furthering myself in that direction. But I think it has served me very well. I think his advice was spot on. Once again, I'm glad I listened, even if I was hesitant at first. So I now work for the American Public Health Association. Within that, I have to emphasize the benefits of membership in a professional association, because I was a member of APHA first. I was a member for about 5 years before I became staff, and it was through my membership that I found out about the position. I was a part of the environment section, and then I started to have leadership positions within the environment section. And through one of those leadership calls, my boss now called in and said, hey, we're hiring a policy analyst in environmental health. And I said, this might be my chance to get in policy. And luckily it was. So what we do in environmental health in APHA is within our Center for Public Health Policy. And what we do is little p policy. We inform policy. So we create communications and materials and fact sheets, webinars, have educational opportunities to inform those that are decision makers, to inform the general public to build a groundswell of public opinion, or to inform those that directly affect policy. APHA has its own government relations department, so that work doesn't fall under the policy center, but what we do in the policy centers, we serve as subject matter experts for the staff throughout APHA, including government relations. So I am on the environmental health team, and I lead our natural environment portfolio, which includes air, water, and climate change. I've been at APHA for 3 years now. For the last 2 years, my work has been almost exclusively around climate change and health. And it's been exciting. It's not a huge jump from my background in air quality and health, because that certainly informs climate change and health. But it has been a challenge. Much of my understanding on climate change and health has been from on-the-job learning. So be adaptable and always be ready to continue research, because things continually evolve. Last year was a huge year for APHA around climate change and health, and hopefully that'll serve as momentum to continue forward. But last year, we launched a campaign, the 2017 Year of Climate Change and Health. The timing was interesting. When we decided the timing, we certainly thought about when we didn't know what was going to happen in the administration change, and we didn't necessarily predict which administration it would be, to put that very politically correct. And so once, elections happen, we said, we're going to stick with this. We're going to go forward with this. We had zero funding to start with for Year of Climate Change and Health, and the year went off without a hitch. We did receive some funds to support Year of Climate Change and Health, and many organizations partnered with us and offered their services, their expertise in kind to move the year forward. So each month had a different theme around climate change and health, climate justice, vulnerable populations, agriculture, water quality, air quality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all on our website at apha.org/climate. But each month we had webinars, we had activities or workshops, and we had many blog posts that were contributed by experts to bring together these different topics. So we have really increased the amount of information that we have on this topic. And so when we do meet with policymakers or decision makers, we have a large amount of things that we can share with them on whatever interest would connect them with this topic. We've also done work on responding to the Flint water crisis and numerous other environmental health issues at the same time. But my work has primarily been around climate change and health. So the challenge therein, as I said, or as I've alluded, funding. We are great on funding on climate change and health right now, but the work has to continue to move forward. And one thing that wasn't appealing to me to continue in a university is that every 5 years your life kind of hangs in the balance as you go and apply for funding again. And I thought that was not great for my stress levels. I didn't handle that very well. Who knew I was coming into the same scenario? 2 of our big grants are ending this year, and so we're in the process for reapplying for some of our climate funding and some of our environmental health funding. So everywhere you go, funding may be a concern. I don't think we can run from this. So that's something, and then it's a tough climate to be looking for climate funding, for lack of a better word, but it's there. There are people that are interested in supporting the work moving forward, especially on the level of philanthropies. And then for valuing environmental policy and law, we definitely look for many opportunities to connect with professionals in environmental policy and law so that we can bring the public health voice into the conversation and make sure that health is considered in environmental policies. In addition, we all within environmental health facilitate several partnerships. I was one of the facilitators for Year of Climate Change and Health Partners, and we had about 60 organizational partners. I'm also staff liaison to the National Environmental Health Partnership Council, which brings together senior and executive level leaders on environmental health at organizations across the US. And they create priorities and they create documents to advance environmental health, among those including climate and other environmental health concerns. And with that, I'll be glad to take questions at the end of the panel. Thanks for your time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stacey Garfinkle, and I'm Associate Counsel with EPA's Office of Inspector General. But a quick disclaimer, I'm here in my personal capacity, so anything I say or views I express are my personal views. Nothing should be construed as reflecting the positions or views of US EPA, EPA OIG, or the federal government. Okay. So a little bit about my background, and then I'll get back to my work at OIG. So I've been interested in environmental issues since I was really young. I lived in Brooklyn, New York when I was a kid. My parents moved us to the suburbs when I was about 9. And I don't know what it was about that move, but something about it sparked something in me. Maybe it was being surrounded by trees. Maybe it was having deer in our backyard, which I thought were awesome. And everybody else who moved away from the city, couldn't understand why there were deer. And I'm like, this is their habitat. You moved into it. And so from that point forward, I just loved animals. I loved wildlife. And I wanted to preserve spaces for them to live in. And then sort of as I learned more about the environment, obviously I became more interested in just air and water in general and toxics and pesticides and all of those things. Another thing that happened, and I will still never understand why she did this, but I had a teacher in 5th grade in a science class who one day showed us a movie, and it was out of the blue, I don't know why. And it was this film that had been done for HBO, and it was called Dead Ahead, the Exxon Valdez Disaster. And it was this film about the Valdez oil spill. And Christopher Lloyd was in it, but it used all this archival footage from the real spill. And something about that, and I was 9, and seeing this footage, and you see sort of just the breadth and the depth of the effects that this had a really profound impact on me too. And so from that point forward, I knew I wanted my life to have something to do with environment. I didn't know what at that point. And then as I got older, I was really interested actually more in politics and stuff like that. And so we moved to Jersey. I did an internship when I was 15 with New Jersey Public Interest Research Group, and they were working on an environmental campaign. And I found it really interesting and cool and engaging. And then the next summer, I interned for my then Senator John Corzine, which was amazing. I was 16 years old, and I was, interning in his constituent services office in Newark, New Jersey. It was a really cool experience, and I kind of thought I wanted to spend my career in politics. So fast forward, and I went to, but I was also interested in environmental, and that was kind of what pushed me in the political direction, was this sort of underlying sense of I care about these environmental issues. At that point, it wasn't really on the forefront of people's minds, and I wanted to do something in that realm. So I ended up going to GW down the street for undergrad, and I went thinking I would study political science and environmental studies. And I happened to my first semester take a criminal justice class, which was housed in like our sociology department at GW. And I fell in love with that class. And all of a sudden I switched my majors to political science with a focus in policy and criminal justice. And those criminal justice classes really sparked, I think, for me, an interest in law, which was always in the back of my mind, but I didn't really know if it was something I wanted to do. And so while I was in college, like, I was very politically active. I ended up being, president of College Dems, thought I really wanted to kind of go the political route. I did some internships, including for League of Conservation Voters. And I wasn't working on environmental policy. One was a campaign they were working on for the 2004 presidential election, aimed at some battleground states. The next summer, I went back and worked on development and fundraising. So not really policy related. But then what happened was I was doing this policy focus, and GW had these like 5-year programs where I could stay an extra year and get my master's in public policy. And I did that. And originally I kind of went into it, like I crafted this special concentration where I would be taking classes in the School of Political Management, like all with this, thinking that I wanted to do more political stuff or campaign work, and ended up really loving the policy side of it. And so I worked part-time doing government relations work for part of grad school, and I really enjoyed it. But at some point I started to also look at the people in the positions I wanted to be in, and I realized a lot of them had law degrees. So whether they were practicing or whether they were lobbying, whatever it was, a lot of them had that background. So I ended up taking a couple of years off trying to figure out if it was what I really wanted, and then went back to law school and went to American, also not that far away. And so that was when I really shifted my focus more toward law. And in law school, you have like core courses, and then you can have all these electives. And I was very fortunate, and then American had like tons of environmental classes and energy and natural resources classes. And so I pretty much, like, outside of the courses that I was required to take, I took probably 90% of my classes in those areas, which also helped me to realize kind of the breadth and depth of environmental areas. Like, I went in thinking, kind of smug, thinking, I know what I want to do. Like, I want to practice environmental law. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, environmental law or energy law or natural resources law or animal law, which in some ways is related to wildlife law. And you realize how broad it is. And so to kind of try to figure out what I wanted to do, I also did a bunch of internships. And so starting with my second semester, my first year of law school, I started interning, and I pretty much spent every semester and summer beginning then somewhere in the federal government. So I spent a lot of time at EPA, in the Office of Compliance, in the Office of Civil Enforcement, working on like Clean Air Act enforcement, in the Office of Administrative Law Judges, and they handle the administrative adjudications for EPA and also for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So a lot of like fisheries cases and species and like marine mammal stuff. I spent a semester at the Solicitor's Office at Interior, a semester at DOJ in the Environment and Natural Resources Division. And I kind of thought I wanted to go into government and was very public service minded, even going into law school. And through those internships, I also realized that, even if and I wasn't sure at that point if I saw myself in government in 10 or 20 years, but knew that it seemed like very valuable experience to get. And so when I graduated, I ended up going back to EPA as like a fellow. And then I worked briefly for the ASPCA doing some like animal welfare regulatory work, and then ended up getting my current job in the IG's office. So the IG's office is a little bit unique because we're an independent office within EPA, and we're charged with, again, I'm here in my personal capacity, but it's an exciting place to work because we garner a lot of interest from Congress and the press and the public, and the agency ends up taking like pretty concrete and sometimes very significant actions off of recommendations we make. So what do we do though? We serve like an oversight function. So our mission sort of broadly is to detect and prevent and detect like fraud, waste, and abuse in agency programs, to help increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the agency as a whole. And then also we have like investigators who are investigating things like contract fraud and grant fraud and stuff like that. And the way that we do that is that we have like auditors and program evaluators as well as investigators I mentioned. And our program evaluators, it's kind of cool. They sort of track the EPA program offices. So like there's an Office of Water, an Office of Air and Radiation in EPA. And so we have evaluators who just work on air and who just work on water. And it's kind of cool. So there are like a lot of environmental aspects to it. And then we receive like requests to look into various matters from like the public, from other employees, members of Congress. Our office has been in the news a lot lately because we've been asked to look into a lot of things that the administrator has been up to and that the agency in general has been up to. And the work that we do tends to like culminate in reports. So it's audit reports, it's investigative reports, it's program evaluations. And like I said, they tend to get a lot of scrutiny from like external stakeholders and from the public. And the recommendations, as I said, can often have like very significant impacts on the agency. And often we ask them to do things that are going to be, you know, an expenditure of resources or of funds, and the agency is constantly doing more with less. So we have to really make sure that everything we're doing is sort of supportable and defensible in terms of the recommendations we're making. And that's sort of where my role comes in the Office of Counsel. So every single like audit, evaluation, investigative report that goes out, like before it is sent anywhere or made public, we review them. And we review them for legal sufficiency. So we want to make sure that like any law, reg, policy, guidance document that's being cited or relied upon in any way is being cited correctly and properly applied, so that the conclusions and recommendations that flow from them are legally supported as well. So it's an interesting job because we deal a lot with EPA administered statutes, so Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, RCRA, CERCLA, all that stuff, FFRA. But then at the same time, like we also do a lot of client counseling for the rest of OIG, so basically their general counsel's office. And so it's a lot of general law issues too. And so it's interesting because I get to work on environmental stuff, but I also work on appropriations issues and HR related matters and employment law. So it's pretty cool. Our office also handles FOIA and FOIA litigation for our office. We also do some employment administrative litigation for like OIG employees. So it's pretty cool and it's been an enjoyable experience. I think the one thing I would say is it's a type of position where, because it is a lot of general law, it's sort of something where to me, the benefit is that we're really helping to support EPA and helping the agency run more effectively and efficiently and kind of contributing overall to EPA's mission, as opposed to necessarily doing like substantive environmental work on a day-to-day basis. And I think for me, that was something that I had to really consider was like, what do I want to be doing? Do I want to be doing like substantive environmental work every single day? Or do I want to be in a position where I feel like at the end of the day, I'm really contributing to, you know, the mission of an agency that I really care about? And that's sort of how I view my work. And for anyone who's interested in oversight work, pretty much every agency and department has an OIG as sort of a plug. So there's EPA OIG, Interior and USDA have OIGs, and Commerce, which houses NOAA as well. So it's exciting. I think to me, sort of the reward and the benefit is seeing recommendations that we make going into place in the agency. And it's interesting. Sometimes I'll be, reading evaluation reports, and it really sheds a tremendous amount of light on agency programs that people aren't really scrutinizing for the most part. You know, EPA has been doing things a certain way for a long time, and then all of a sudden you have evaluators going in and looking at it and really realizing that there are a lot of improvements that can be made. And so it's really kind of cool to see those sort of real world impacts. And, you know, every time a recommendation is sort of accepted and they're taking corrective action, it's pretty cool. You feel like you're really contributing to that, or the office is contributing. As far as challenges, I think government-wide, for anyone who's interested in government, you're constantly being asked to do more with less. And I think that's a challenge, not just for my office, but anywhere. So, you know, having the same amount of work or more work, but with fewer resources to do it. And then the other thing, because we're independent, is making sure that we really are truly independent. And that's tough, especially, you know, right now in this climate where it's very politically charged, and we want to make sure we're not, you know, seen as favoring the administrator or seen as, you know, going after anyone in particular. And so I think that's definitely a challenge and sort of a unique thing about like an OIG or an oversight role. But yeah, that's it. And I look forward to taking questions.
Well, my name is Dmitry Karakitsos. I'm a partner at Holland and Knight. I guess I'll start off by saying I never grew up with any sort of interest in the environmental space. And if somebody had told me in law school or even early on in my career that I would have done things that I had done or worked on, I would have thought they were absolutely insane. So I grew up in the Lansing area of Michigan, which is the capital city of Michigan. in undergraduate, I was really drawn to public policy and politics. When I was in undergraduate, I interned for my local congressman. I also, after that, interned for a local state and local lobbyist that I had grown up knowing. And both jobs I absolutely loved, and I think a lot like Stacey in both offices. And when I went and talked to people about kind of getting into politics and the policy space, I heard very frequently law school is a great education. It's a great way to get your foot in the door. It's a great kind of, it will just be helpful for you in that career. So you should really think about it when you graduate undergraduate. So I did that. I ended up going to law school down in Florida. And instead of, kind of the focus on the traditional legal side of things, I always kind of knew it was an ends to get, or a means to get to into the public policy space. I focused a lot on constitutional law. I took a lot of state and local classes, international classes, just to get as much experience as I could. Instead of, in between semesters in the summer, instead of working at a law firm, I pursued some work with somebody down there who was heavily involved in state and local politics and had previously been involved in national politics as well. So that was kind of what all of my law school experience was geared to. After law school, decided to come to DC. I had no kind of ins here. I had no thought of what I was going to be doing. I actually came at the start of 2009. I am a Republican, and at that time was not a good time to be a Republican in Washington, D.C. with the White House flipping over, pretty much a supermajority in the Senate and a huge majority in the House of Representatives. The first opportunity I got, just kind of dumb luck, I heard of a legal internship at the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. I had no idea what that was, who was on the committee, what they did, anything about it. But I jumped at the opportunity. I did a lot of Googling just to figure out what was going on there and what kind of work they worked on. I applied and I got basically what was a temporary 4-month legal internship there. I think I'll say, just for those who haven't worked on the Hill, I think incredible experience. I'm so glad I did it. It's certainly less than glamorous at times. It was difficult watching friends in law school get associate positions at law firms and start making good money, and I'm an intern on the Hill answering phones and responding to letters. But that's just kind of the way that the Hill works, and I think it applies to outside the Hill as well, but certainly on the Hill, where you really have to start at the bottom, work your way up. Just another one of those right time, right place moments where my internship was coming to an end and they had a full-time staffer leaving, and because I had been there, got to know folks, they offered me the full-time position. And again, it was still doing more of the same, answering phones, responding to constituents and things like that. One thing I quickly learned on the Hill is never say no to anybody. Whenever somebody asked, would you like to help with this? I said yes. I didn't even know what it was, and I'd have to go to my desk and try to figure it out as quickly as I could so I could be helpful and put forth work that would kind of give them confidence in me and have them come back to asking for more things. A good example, I was sitting at somebody else's desk one day when a senior kind of career staffer came in, or senior staffer on the committee came in and said, kind of looked at me and said, "You're not who I was expecting to see sitting here." And I could see on his face, he needed help with something, but didn't want to ask me and didn't know if he could trust me to ask me, right? And I said, "Can I help? What can I do? What can I do?" And I was eager enough that he said, "All right, let's see how this goes." And he gave me a task to do, and I did well enough on it that he then started coming back to me instead of the other person. So, you just start kind of getting into those situations and learning as much as you can. I got very, very lucky in my role there in that I got to back up for part of my time as a junior staffer, the deputy staff director of the committee. He had a broad portfolio kind of touching everything, energy, environment, on the committee and you know, served as kind of a mentor for me, and I would say I got beyond lucky because of how smart and well respected I think on both sides of the aisle this person was. He went on to be run energy environment policy for Speaker Boehner, and then until very recently for President Trump. So very well accomplished, great person to learn from on the job. The first issue that I got to take over on my own was the chemical portfolio on the committee. I won't kind of directly quote what I was told when I got it, but just to paraphrase a little bit, I was told this is never going to take up much of your time. This won't be a big deal. You know, there's a partisan bill out there. It was Senator Lautenberg from New Jersey's bill. The business community, the right, didn't take it seriously. Every year, the committee basically had a hearing on the bill. Very divided. The left talked about the need for it. The right talked about how bad it would be. And it was kind of a stalemate. So that's the expectations that I got going in to that first issue. And I'll kind of go back to how wrong that was in a minute. But, you know, as I continued at EPW, my role expanded in many ways. I got to help negotiate environmental streamlining provisions, for example, on a major infrastructure bill that passed. And as contentious as that can be, I mean, that then passed with broad bipartisan support, signed into law. And that's a fun issue that's kind of ongoing. Every infrastructure bill, you talk about the balance, and I think I'll probably use that word a couple times, but the balance between trying to get these roads and bridges built or water infrastructure or whatever it is, and how to appropriately protect the environment, human health, things like that, because you know, at that time we had bridges collapsing, right? So you don't want to unduly delay these projects because there are real world impacts if that happens, but at the same time you don't want kind of a lasting environmental or public health kind of risk from that. My primary focus for a lot of time was energy policy. I did that for both a member from Oklahoma and from Louisiana, obviously two very energy-rich states with major oil and gas production there, but also cared about renewable energy in particular in those states, wind and geothermal. I had the opportunity to work on some very high-profile issues like the BP oil spill, hydraulic fracturing, kind of at the height of all the discussion about that. And being from Michigan, something that hit close to home, I got to go down to Flint with primarily the Michigan Senate delegation and have a lot of meetings there. And our committee was actually the one through the water infrastructure bill that passed the bipartisan solution to try to help the city in the crisis that it was in. So got to work on kind of a lot of diverse, really cool issues. But going back to what took up most of my time was really the chemical portfolio and TSCA reform. For those of you who don't know, TSCA, or the Toxic Substances Control Act, is a law from 1976 that was designed to regulate chemicals in commerce in the United States, and that covers everything. I mean, just about everything in this room is in some way, shape, or form touched by chemistry. They had kind of very high hopes when that law was first enacted. By 1990, it's kind of the greatest example used by folks of its failure, and it failed for a number of reasons. But by 1990, EPA's ban of asbestos was struck down in court, and EPA largely didn't use the law to regulate chemicals from 1990 on. So it was, you know, it got to the point where it was a big failure. It was the only major environmental law that had not been rewritten or significantly updated since its inception. You know, I mentioned before, obviously the environmental space and politics can be very polarizing, but this was a really, really rare opportunity to work on an environmental law that was viewed on both sides of the aisle and by a really diverse coalition of people as broken. I think it's safe to say Democrats, environmentalists, public health advocates felt it wasn't doing its job. It wasn't protecting human health and the environment from potentially hazardous or dangerous chemical exposures. I think certainly there wasn't disagreement on the right that it wasn't doing what it was intended to do originally, but there was also kind of a business perspective. that the failure of a federal system was resulting in kind of a unworkable patchwork of state regulations. So you had states like where my boss was from, Oklahoma, didn't have the money, didn't have the resources, didn't have the ability internally to regulate chemicals. So their citizens didn't have any protections. You had states like California, New York, the more progressive, larger states, who had money, resources, but we heard from a lot of those states in private conversations too that we don't want to be doing this. It's better for a national standard to protect the citizens everywhere. Certainly from a business perspective, you can't make cleaning products, you can't make furniture, you can't make the plastic that's in the National Geographic globe 50 different ways for 50 different states, right? You have to have kind of uniformity there. And so because of this kind of bipartisan desire to fix this law and to have kind of a strong national standard, things started moving a lot more than folks originally thought they were going to. So Senator Lautenberg came to Senator Inhofe and originally asked for stakeholder meetings. At a staff level, we got those together and noticed that there was a little bit more common ground once you got folks into a room and not on their talking points, but actually talking about the issues and possible solutions than we had thought. At that point, we had Senator Bitter from Louisiana who really got involved, primarily because of Louisiana is such a major chemical producing state. It was a very, very long soap opera of chaos, for the best way I can describe it. From there, there was a whole lot of ups and downs, but to sum it up very succinctly, Senator Lautenberg unfortunately passed away soon after the bill was introduced. From there, we had co-sponsors turning on the bill. We had, NGO groups who would call me and say how great this was and how much they supported the bill, then publicly trash the bill. We had, luckily for us, Senator Udall from New Mexico, who is a staunch environmentalist from a very staunch environmentalist family, going back generations, really stepped up to take the reins of the bill on the Democratic side. And in part because New Mexico is a state like Oklahoma that doesn't have the money, the resources, was never going to get the protections that California could provide its citizens or that New York could, and saw the need for a strong national standard. In addition to Senator Udall stepping up, the passing of Senator Lautenberg also brought forth the stepping up of Senator Boxer, who was then the chairwoman of the committee from California, as the staunchest opponent of the bill. And that's not, the chairman of the committee is not who you want opposing the bill that you're working on. So that's a very kind of formidable person to be against. Fast forward after years and years of work, we got a bill that had strong bipartisan support. The House passed it 403 to 12, which is pretty historic for a major environmental law. The Senate passed it by voice vote, which means nobody objected enough to even have their vote recorded as a no. And you had a Republican House and a Republican Senate sending an environmental bill that in June of 2016, President Obama signed and had a signing ceremony for and was very proud of. So, that was kind of the biggest project I worked on in my career. That was absolutely exhilarating. It was an incredible experience. It was also exhausting. And having worked on a big project like that, to go back to some of the politics and other things you have to deal with when you're on the Hill didn't seem all that appealing to me. So that's when I decided to leave and join Holland and Knight. I've been there for about a year and a half now. Today I work in the Public Policy and Regulatory Group, which is a bipartisan group of about 90 professionals spread across the country. It's a very, very diverse group of folks from, we've got folks who were in President Clinton's EPA. We have, somebody who was President Clinton and Gore's kind of primary climate change advisor, and then we have Trump campaign. So it's just completely across the spectrum. I would say what I do now is not too dissimilar from what I did when I was in the Senate. You're always kind of working with people to try to solve problems strategize how to best achieve goals, identify issues, kind of key players, who's for and against your position. You know, that doesn't always mean one thing is setting realistic expectations as well. That doesn't, you know, identifying a goal doesn't mean identifying a way to advance the ball. Sometimes it's not cede too much ground. I mean, depending on the politics and where things are. You know, one thing I loved about my job in the Senate, and I continue to love about my job today, is that there's just never really a dull moment, and I work on so many diverse issues. I don't go in and do one thing every day. You know, one minute I could be working on task implementation, the next minute it could be, you know, Superfund sites, fuel economy standards. I mean, you name it. There's just a huge diversity in those issues. And also in who you work with in government. I get to work with the House, with members of the House, with members of the Senate, with the administration, particularly the White House and EPA quite a bit. I think it's not easy working in an environment where staff and members are turning over so frequently. You have staff who gain kind of knowledge and experience on issues and then leave to go work on the outside, leave to go to the administration or to other offices. So you're constantly dealing with changes there. You also have politics interjected at every layer of all of this, right? So even if you have consistency, you have folks in the House who are running for re-election every 2 years and the Senate every 6. The White House, as we know from this election and previous elections, I mean, it makes a big difference in this town, kind of who is in charge of the executive branch, and not only kind of shaping debate of issues, but implementing policies through the federal agencies. You know, frequent challenge you see in this space is not just how to get results, but how to get lasting results. You can have executive orders and you can have things that kind of patch over problems or can solve things temporarily, but can be undone very easily. So what you want, you know, if you can, is really to get a regulatory or statutory fix that's more lasting. You know, I think overall, what I learned and what made me kind of passionate about the environmental law space is it's important not only to the environment, public health, but to basically our standard of living and our economy. Everything, I think, requires a very appropriate balance. We obviously need clean air and clean water, but we need jobs too. You know, we need cars, we need factories to make all the things that we rely on day to day. But again, it's got to be done in a very responsible way. So you have to find that appropriate balance and cut through a lot of the politics that we deal with. You know, you hear a lot of rhetoric. You often deal with arguments that don't make a lot of sense or are not based in facts or common sense in DC. But it's kind of trying to cut through that and get to, you know, real achievable results that I've tried to focus on both in the Senate and now in private practice. You know, it is difficult trying to work in an increasingly polarized environment on very polarizing issues, but you know, trying to find consensus, I think, is why a lot of us are here and have passion about the space. So look forward to taking questions when we get there.
I don't know about you all, but I'm sitting here feeling really inspired and I've learned so much today. I just want to thank ELI and Caitlin for inviting me to participate in today's kickoff session for your summer educational series. My name is Nicole Sitaraman, and I'm a senior manager of public policy for a company called Sunrun. Sunrun is the largest residential solar plus storage company in the country, and I'm focused on representing the company's interests in the Mid-Atlantic region, both our legislative initiatives as well as our regulatory initiatives. So Mid-Atlantic meaning DC, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, and Delaware. So just to take multiple steps back to share a little bit about my path to working in the solar industry, solar plus storage industry, my path is quite winding, but there are kind of common threads that I'm excited to share with you. So I'm originally from Philadelphia, grew up in the 80s, low income background, grew up in the Germantown section of Philadelphia, and had a single parent household, helped my mom raise my brother. He's now 30 now, but my little brother, who just graduated from Delaware State with a PhD in optics, of all things, kind of very specific. But we've had, as a family, a kind of a really challenged pathway to upward mobility and getting out of poverty, really, because we were on welfare for much of my childhood. But I had a really resourceful and passionate mother who was passionate about education, and she knew that that was our ticket out of the challenges that we were facing coming up. So, you know, my background is very much steeped in a strong consciousness about the challenges of low-income communities and the experience of African Americans in urban America. And so that experience really has informed much of my path in my career and in my life. So when I was 10, I got a scholarship, community scholarship, to go to Germantown Friends School, which is a Quaker school in Philadelphia. And I went to Germantown Friends between 5th grade all the way up through 12th grade. During that era, you know, a lot of things were happening nationally and locally in our region that really left a major impact on me, and a strong desire to pursue civil rights as a career. So the LA riots happened in 1992. Philadelphia had its own challenges with a lot of kind of static and troubled relations between African American community and the Jewish community. A lot of things happened, like in the 80s, Mayor Wilson Goode, a Democrat, did like a horrendous thing. He dropped a bomb on, there was a kind of alternative cultural group called MOVE. They were living on Osage Avenue in West Philadelphia, and I guess the community was very upset about their alternative lifestyle, and there was a huge battle between police and this group, and there was a bomb dropped in their house. It made national news, and people still today think back on that. So there was just a lot going on in Philly that really sparked a strong interest in human rights and civil rights. When I was 17, I participated in a program called Operation Understanding, which is for juniors in high school in Philadelphia, African American and Jewish students, to come together and go on a trip to Israel and Senegal. And just for a little over a month, we traveled together and talked about actually the history of our collaboration between our communities on civil rights issues. And the experience was just amazing. I mean, I had never been out of the country. I was 16 or 17. And the conversations that we had about our experiences as two communities, some very common experiences of oppression, and also working together to bring this country forward on civil rights legislation and activism during the 60s and 70s. You know, just really was just a wonderful kind of moment for me, and really helped me, you know, just continue my my focus on these issues. So let's see, after high school, I went to Yale University. I'm a first gen, went to Yale University, And you would think that my experience as a first-generation college student at Yale would be kind of hard and difficult, but I actually found that experience to be really enriching. I met so many other students who were first gen, going to college, coming from low-income backgrounds. Like one of my closest friends from college was from Appalachia. We hung out all the time. I met so many other students there who had shared experiences of coming up with very difficult circumstances and kind of overcoming obstacles and things like that, and having an interest in working in fields that really helped people overcome poverty and racism. So Yale was a wonderful place. I met my lifelong friends there, who are still my friends today. A lot of them living in DC area, which is funny, some working in policy. And during my college experience, you know, I didn't do anything related to the environment, actually, in college. That's a theme that I'm hearing on this panel. Like it was, certainly I went to a Quaker school. The Quakers love some nature. I mean, they took us camping every year, and you know, I developed an interest in camping and things like that, and appreciation for nature, but not really a focus like I'm going to work on, you know, environmental issues, or I'm going to work on clean energy policy. That just really wasn't a part of my mindset just yet at that time. But you know, during college, I had various opportunities to just expand on the interest in human rights. Did a couple of fellowships, traveled to the Netherlands, traveled to Copenhagen, did a lot in the area of human rights. And I got a fellowship after graduating from college to work here at the Center for Law and Social Policy on, it was post-welfare reform, so prime time for a lot of policy wonks to, you know, figure things out. So I came here for a year to do a fellowship. And that organization really introduced me to the, sometimes the mind-numbing and boring and very challenging experience of working on policy issues. I mean, it really is kind of, you know, chipping away at a huge mountain frequently, and it's not glamorous, and it's not, you know, it doesn't feel good all the time. It feels frequently that you're not really making much progress. But what I learned from that experience was really the importance of staying the course when you don't get that instant gratification on issues that you're working on. Just really staying focused and staying connected with a community of professionals who are like-minded and equally passionate about moving the ball forward on the issue that you're concerned about. I had deferred, when I graduated from Yale, deferred law school for a year. So after the Center for Law and Social Policy, I went to law school at Boston University. And candidly, you know, I never took an energy class, never took an environmental law class. That really wasn't on my radar either. Was very passionate about human rights issues, civil rights, so I took those types of classes. Where I felt like I was really empowered and came to life and really excited about being in law school, because the first year was horrible. I could not stand it. Let's just keep it real. The first year of law school was really, really just felt so unnatural and so detached from what really drove my passion. The Socratic method I just felt was just so antiquated and purposeless, and you know, it just was not a fun experience for me. Second and third year I had more fun because I felt like I had more control over the classes that I could take, and I also did clinic in addition to doing a lot of writing. So clinic, I felt for those here who may be in law school on the phone or participating remotely, I believe that clinic is a really important training experience that you can get. So a lot of law schools now have environmental law clinics or environmental justice clinics. I highly recommend that you do that in addition to journal and you know, moot court and things like that. But really getting some practice, learning by doing, is where I felt like I had the most fun and I learned the most, rather than just sitting in a class or in a seminar and kind of, you know, taking notes. And I find that for me, clinic and really being actively engaged in helping people, even as a student, was the most valuable for me. After law school, I got a job at a large firm because I had some loans to try to pay down. That's another reality that, you know, people kind of dance around, but law school is very expensive, as are, you know, most graduate programs. Very expensive. When you don't come from a family that, you know, has wealth built up for generations, you're kind of carrying not only yourself, but sometimes you're carrying your family members as well. And, you know, you have to make certain decisions to make sure everybody's okay and you're okay with Sally Mae. So I worked for a large firm in Philadelphia for 2 years, and it was fine. It was, you know, I worked in the litigation division as an associate and was paid well and was able to put a little dent in my debt. But then, you know, I just kept the passion going. So while I was an associate, I volunteered with a variety of organizations in Philadelphia, maintained the activism kind of passion that's in me, and maintained relationships with key mentors, both in Philadelphia and here in DC. I want to pause there, that it's really important on your path, even if it's a winding road to getting where you're eventually going to go with environmental law or energy policy, to keep relationships alive with either whether it's professors or employers, folks in the community who you're connected with, professional organizations. Maintain those relationships. Be intentional about keeping in touch with folks, because people remember that, and they'll keep you in mind when there are openings for good opportunities, for good positions. It's really just the old-fashioned, just, you know, be friendly. You know, those who, what's the scripture? You know, he who has friends must make himself friendly. You know, it's a really kind of old-fashioned kind of principle, but it definitely applies throughout your career. So again, while I was at the firm, I just maintained certain relationships and dialogue with folks. And I just decided to leave after 2 years to come back to DC because I love DC so much. DC is such a, you know, people focus on the federal side of the excitement that happens here in DC, but there's a lot happening locally in all 8 wards in the District of Columbia around a variety of really critical issues affecting everyone's lives. So it's just a wonderful, diverse community here, and I love Washington almost as much as I love Philadelphia. So I came back here and I got a great job at a law firm here, civil rights litigation law firm. Very aggressive plaintiffs, employment law firm focused on representing employees who felt that they've been discriminated against, whether because of race, sexual orientation, whether they have been sexually harassed, whistleblowers, and I'll come back to that because that kind of was the bridge to my working on energy policy. But worked at this firm, worked with some fabulous people, really learned about the art of winning at this firm, and just really brilliant lawyers who are very passionate about workers' rights and ensuring that all people have a voice, have a seat at the table, and that they really brought to life the importance of everybody having a lawyer in employment situations that go wrong. Not everyone has the ability to get a lawyer, but I really enjoyed that experience, really developed my persuasive writing skills. Again, this is kind of a very basic skill set that will carry you very far in your career if you can really kind of find your voice when you're writing. How many folks are in law school here? Okay, so in law school, sometimes you feel that you're kind of forced to write based on a formula for legal writing, and there may be a sense that you're losing your creativity or your voice in the writing process. But working at the firm and working at if you can find a good place to work where people really nurture your writing and your voice, can really bring dividends for you for your career. So this firm, that's what I found, and that's what has carried me. I worked there, and I represented a couple of whistleblowers at nuclear power plants at a nameless company in the South, a utility, representing employees who complained about public health challenges, and the company overlooking some things, and were retaliated against because they raised these concerns. And that experience really introduced me to the impacts of corporations on public health and in the environment in a lot of different communities. While I was at the firm, I also volunteered with the DC chapters of the Sierra Club and became very active in their energy committee. And just developed an interest in merging civil rights with an interest in environmental issues. And actually just decided to take the plunge and jump into energy policy, merging my civil rights background with a focus on energy justice issues, and make a career shift. The relationships that I established while both at the firm and at the Sierra Club and at the Center for Law and Social Policy, kind of my worlds all kind of came together to make that transition easier. And that's why I emphasize the relationships. And through making that shift, I ended up at the DC Office of the People's Council, which is the ratepayer advocate for all DC utility consumers, and worked on renewable energy policy for DC, advancing community solar, aggressive RPS, renewable portfolio standard, which I'm sure you all are experts in, focused on renewable energy as a tool for consumer empowerment. Specifically, DC is this is a solar city. Not referencing the company, but really focus on expanding access to solar to more consumers. The People's Council, who I work for, was very committed to that. And her role is to look out for all residential and small business consumers and make sure that utility rates are reasonable and just. And so part of that mandate is to look for options legislatively and before the Public Service Commission to make sure that all consumers have access to clean energy, which the city is very committed to. I'll fast forward because I'm rambling, but after several years at OPC, I had developed a lot of great relationships. I had done a lot for the city in terms of advocating for great legislation, representing our office at the commission. And so I decided someone had tapped me on the shoulder about an opportunity at Sunrun. And so I applied and got the job. And so now I'm representing the solar industry before a variety of regulatory and legislative officials, and advocating for improved rules and regulations to facilitate consumer access to solar, as well as battery storage. I just look forward to the questions. I'm sure there are tons for all of these wonderful panelists. But one of the things that I wanted to end with was, my focus has been on kind of consumer rights and civil rights and consumer choice. And I'm so glad that, Dimitrios, you shared that, your political affiliation. That's one of the challenges in the clean energy space, that it's way too polarized. The conversation is ridiculously polarized. And I would say that, one of my closest allies and friends in the clean energy movement is a Republican, an African-American Republican, who is very passionate about the consumer choice aspect of bringing on a more kind of solarized energy delivery system. And there's just more, that we need more of that, more conversation around the fact that our environment, clean energy really should not be about your political affiliation. So I'll just end there, and thanks for your time.
Great, thank you. Time for questions. I'd like to start in the room, and then again, as a reminder, if you're online, just submit your questions through the questions box on GoTo. Does anyone want to start us out? Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ray Matthews. I'm a fellow at USDA, and I've been in the agency space at USDA in the Park Service and the Forest Service for about 3 or 4 years now as a fellow. In between time, to grad school here in DC for international policy. So my interest in my undergraduate degree was in agriculture. And so I have a huge interest in development, agriculture, environmental policy, environmental justice, energy. And I'm at a hard time. I'm interested now in going back to school and get in law school. And my questions have been answered pretty much from everybody throughout the panel, so thank you for that. But I want to see if I get a response specifically about your experiences in agency or in Congress or in a firm around environmental issues and law, and how your experience has been different for those who had those different experiences. And I think typically Dimitrios and Stacey and Nicole.
Yeah, I'll try to kick it off and interrupt me if I'm not getting to the point you're looking for. I've had just different experiences really almost day to day in some of the same jobs. What's important today, particularly in a political world, is not important or as important tomorrow, and a new issue kind of overtakes it. So working in Congress, that's a lot of what's kind of the issue du jour, and unfortunately a lot of times, like Nicole mentioned, what fight are you in? I wish we could do a little bit less of that, and I think there's folks interested in doing less of that. But as you can see in the country, I mean, there's polarization, right? And in order to be here to fight for what you believe in or what your constituents believe in, you have to get elected, and you have to, cater to those bases. I think it's a little more consistent from the outside perspective, because when you have clients, you're whether you're working for solar, for oil and gas, for chemicals, for whoever it may be, there is kind of a consistent mission and vision and purpose. So it doesn't matter who's in the White House, doesn't matter who's in the Senate or the Congress, or doesn't matter what's important, on the front page of the newspaper today. You're kind of moving forward a little bit more with those issues and a little bit more consistency, I think, from my experience.
Yeah, and I would sort of actually, in some ways, echo that, but sort of from the perspective of the agency, where I do think if you're working in the private sector and, let's say it's solar, you have your clients, or even a nonprofit where you have your mission, and no matter what's going on, you're sticking to that mission. Government is different that way. And I think one of the things I've realized I was basically a law clerk and an intern under the Obama administration, and now I'm an employee under the Trump administration, and I'm in an office that's independent, so I'm a little bit, insulated from it. But one of the things I have observed is that, there have been radical policy shifts and changes, especially in the environmental space. And so I think one of the things to know going into it as a career employee is, if you're thinking about this, especially for a long-term career, am I okay with that? Am I comfortable with that? What I'm doing today, I might be undoing tomorrow or doing the opposite of it. And am I going to be okay advocating, positions that differ wildly from my personal beliefs? And I think that's kind of one of the things to keep in mind. And I think this might be sort of an extreme, version of what's happening. I think this particular transition from administration to administration has been maybe a little bit more pronounced than others, but I do think that's something to keep in mind. And so, if you're looking at, let's say, USDA and things of that nature, like, well, what are the policies now? Am I okay advocating for those policies? And then, if that shifts, am I going to be okay advocating for something different? And so to me, that's kind of the biggest thing. Yeah, and I think something that is sort of unique. Of course, if you come to an OIG, then you're sort of insulated. So.
I would just echo what my colleagues just said. And the theme of being nimble is really critical, particularly in this space. Certainly, maintaining a close, maintaining your own kind of integrity and sense of purpose and what you want to accomplish is really critical. But things do change rapidly. Even in my space, within the solar industry, not everybody's always aligned on the path forward and how we want to get more solar to more people. So, so being nimble, being open to different perspectives as well. But yeah, that's all.
Thank you. Do we have another question in the room?
So I had a question for Colby. Just because your experience sort of seems like you stayed in one organization for a really long time, which is really cool. Yeah, and rare. Yeah. So do you see that as like a benefit of your career trajectory? And could you just talk a little bit more about how that has impacted?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yes, it is very rare. But I'm not rare at National Geographic. A lot of people have worked there for like 30, 40 years. I'm like, I'm still in the lesser in terms of number of years. So it's a little bit different, I think, when you're kind of working in the bubble. But then when a lot of my friends and, just hearing everybody else's career trajectory, they're doing the 2 to 3 year stints. I think one thing, when I went back to school to get my MBA, I was kind of like, this is going to be my pivot point out of National Geographic. Maybe I'll do something else, work at a full profit company, try something else. But because there has been so much change and turnover at National Geographic, it's actually opened up a lot of doors for me that I didn't realize would be there when I started 11 years ago. So I think depending on where you are in the organization and what's happening, change can be a good thing, and it can open up a lot of doors. Because people work there so long, when we kind of separated into two companies, they offered early retirement packages for a lot of people that had been there for those 30 to 40 years. We still have some that have stuck around because they really like live and breathe National Geographic. They say they look yellow blood, and so it's been an interesting transition, but at the same time it has opened up doors. And so I kind of see that continuing to happen now. It's just kind of a new age there. So, I mean, I don't think that's definitely the right career path at all organizations. It really just depends on what's happening and where you see yourself going.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick question from the web, and then we'll go back to the room. So someone online said, first, I wanted to say thank you to all the panelists, especially Nicole. As someone who has recently graduated with a JD/LLM, I appreciate her candidness on the subject. What advice would you give a recent graduate with degrees in environmental law who wants to transition from working as an environmental policy fellow in a federal agency and wants to enter the private or nonprofit environmental arena, specifically with environmental justice issues?
That's a great question. Thank you for posting the question. This is a subject that I just had breakfast with someone about who's trying to make the transition out of an NGO into kind of the the private space focused on clean energy. The best advice that I would provide is to, on a very practical level, go to where these organizations are hanging out. So, if you're interested in, the solar industry, go to solar conferences, just rub a whole lot of elbows. Another space that I think that people kind of overlook in terms of building relationships in a variety of spaces in this field, the regulators have their own get-togethers, and sometimes those get-togethers are open to the public. I would encourage folks to get to know some of the regulators. This is, in most fields, a lot of this is relationship driven. So you get all your skills and credentials in school, and you do all your internships and fellowships and such. But a lot of the way that people get these jobs is because they know someone. It's a message that I'm raising both with respect to diversity issues, but in general, kind of trying to help the industry move itself forward, to open the door wider for more people to get in. So that's candidly the what has worked for me in terms of making a shift from one space to another.
Great. We have another question in the room.
Hi, my name is Deepti Bansal, and I'm a rising 2L at GW here in town. And I just had a question. I know one of you mentioned that your dream job has changed over time. I'm just curious to hear, what are your current dream jobs if you're not already in it?
This is good. Maybe you're all in it.
I think, so I'll start, but I'm not going to be the only one that goes. So I would like to be in a position where I'm like focused on the wildlife lens, so where I'm running, like I'm the VP of programs for some sort of impact-oriented place. I also think it would be kind of fun to get into the sustainability world. Margot. So like working at like a well-known brand that we all know, and making sure that they are, that everything that they're doing, the sustainable thing, but then also like making sure that forming partnerships, let's say. So like on being at the National Geographic side a few years ago, we did a partnership with Tom's Animal Initiative, and through Big Cats Initiative, which is one of my big projects. And so they made backpacks and shoes with animal print on them, and it was this really cool, fun way to get the message out. And I think it'd be neat to work on the Tom side of that and run that side from like a big company or organization like that.
My dream job's super similar to that. So, in the future, I'm really interested in potentially moving to the private sector, and like many years down the line, perhaps being the director of sustainability at a big brand, so that I can kind of combine this partnerships stuff that I work on now with some of the direct supply chain experience that I have, and work on building out corporate policy directly instead of working in an advisory capacity for that. And it's also really interesting how much collaboration there is between the public policy, NGO, and corporate sectors around sustainability issues. So it would be really awesome to be in the middle of that vortex, kind of as the choir conductor for all that stuff.
Oh, that's a tough question. That's a great question. Thank you.
Really good question.
So my dream job would certainly build on the skills that I have, the basic science knowledge that can inform, hopefully continuing forward in environmental health policy. Also, I have a secret love of graphic design. If something could incorporate that. I don't know how I can weave that into something, but any opportunity to get to use that side of the brain really frees up my creativity and thought on this side of my brain as well. And then I would love to be able to engage environmental justice communities directly and effectively and continuously, and be able to make sure, and we work to do that, but ensure that they're at the table and that their expertise is utilized to inform future decisions. And ultimately, my dream career is one where I can really truly feel like I am protecting the health of people all across the nation.
And I always thought I would probably kind of want to be in government forever. That's sort of what I thought even in law school, that I really liked it and I wanted to kind of be where policy is really getting made. That's definitely shifted over time. I think certainly recently too, I've begun to kind of reevaluate long-term what I want. And so, you know, similar to what Colby and Margot were saying as well about the private sector, I think there's so much innovation that's going on in the private sector right now that I can see myself potentially moving there, you know, down the line. And I think also, to some degree, if you're at a company or something, you can take ownership of things in a different sort of a way, of an initiative, of a project, where in government, you know, there are these huge bureaucracies, and unless you're at the very top, it can be a little bit harder. So I don't entirely know yet what I want that to look like, but I think it might involve, you know, the private sector, or possibly maybe moving to the Hill or something like that. But yeah, I think, you know, long term, it's kind of evolving. I'll be the one to say, for me, it's constantly changing. And some days I think I want to do one thing, and then when I grow up, and other days I think I want it to be something else. So, yeah.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Stacey said, I mean, I didn't make the comment, but the way that it hit me was, personally, I don't know. I mean, I never thought I would have been happy doing, I mean, I absolutely hated chemistry in high school and college and growing up. If you told my chemistry professor that I helped write the law that regulates chemicals, she might move to Mexico or something to get away from it. So it's just an evolution, and what I like today, you know, it can change.
Yeah, I would agree with that, actually, because I guess I'm reaching a certain age where I'm kind of, you know, letting things flow. And I used to be very driven when I was younger, but I'm a little less now. I'm certainly driven by the issues that concern me, and facilitating a cleaner planet and climate change and consumer empowerment and things. But I'm realizing that there are many ways to address those issues. So I'm kind of, my dream job is one that pays the bills and enables me to take great vacations, and where I'm also doing good for people on the planet.
And just, I'll kind of revisit it for a second, kind of what Nicole was saying too. Like, I think that's what it is. It's about finding something where you can have an impact. So for me, if that's staying in government, I'm happy to stay in government. If it's leaving at some point, I'm happy to leave. And so I think probably a lot of us feel the same way. It's like where we can have the most impact on the things that we care about. And yeah.
And I would just plug also in line with that there's a lot of really amazing organizations. Sounds like, for example, Nicole is involved in a lot of stuff as extracurriculars throughout, like being involved with the Sierra Club. I manage a community orchard in DC in my spare time because it's like a way for me to literally get my hands dirty and work on urban agriculture here, and to connect to a community that experiences food insecurity through that. So you shouldn't limit your thinking to your impact just through your job. There's so many amazing ways for you to impact the issues that you care about in many ways, and a lot of them will end up surprising you in the way that they do end up connecting to your career in the long term through the relationships or the skills that you gain there.
Great, thank you. So we did have another question from the web, and it was, how important has mentorship been in your career, and how did you go about developing relationships with your mentors?
I'll speak. I think very important and still developing, I think, are the two things. So I do think it's really important to find, you know, a couple key people who will sort of like be your advocates, who know you, know your work like you, like you, get along well with, who are willing to go the extra mile for you, whether it's a recommendation or, sending a job your way or asking about opportunities that you might not know about on your behalf. I mean, there's a lot of different things, but I think just finding those people who you can really rely on for sort of candid advice. I mean, to me, that's sort of the biggest thing. And how to find them, I think it depends. I mean, I know people where their professors are their closest mentors. For me, it's been some supervisors I've worked with who are just amazing and just felt like my biggest cheerleaders who I've stayed in touch with, and who I feel comfortable picking up the phone, whether it's about a job, a career path, whatever it is, or if this is where I want to get, is this the right path? And just those people who will support you. And I think it's kind of a strange way to say it, but I think you'll know them when you find them. Like, there are some people who you'll just click with and are happy to meet you, before work, after work, happy to take a few minutes during their hurried lunch break to talk with you. So I think it's very valuable and to keep in touch with them. But yeah, I think it's that kind of thing. You can sort of find them anywhere, but just, hold on to them when you do.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. When I was in grad school, I had mentors that were fantastic mentors, and it was situational. It was because I was in grad school and this person was my advisor. And I told you about one, he picked up on my interest in policy. My department chair was a mentor of mine. When it was time for me to apply for my degree, so you have to finish that semester, I said, is this the right time? Can I finish this in this amount of time? And he was like, maybe. It's going to take a lot of work. I don't know what that means, but I went ahead and I applied, and I could see that he was actually working just as hard. He was putting in as much as I was putting in to help me get out the door. Mentors open doors for you. And then my mentor into my postdoctoral program, I learned through his example very much. So I saw how he, not to tell you all not to have a social life, but worked around the clock and put everything into it. And that showed me, okay, this is what is expected to me to make it to that next level. Now I'm at the point in my life, and these people I'm still in constant contact with these mentors, but now I was given some really good advice by my aunt. She was like, you need some mentors that are like you, kind of age, kind of gender-wise, social settings similar to you, have your educational background, but are advanced. They're at the level that you want to be, to kind of help show you the ropes of how to get there. So I'm recruiting folks, and and I have a couple of great mentors in that space right now as well, and are really giving. It helps to see people that you can really identify with, but that can also have been there and done that, and really it helps. So peer mentoring is kind of what I'm looking to right now.
I think just to really quickly build on what Natasha said, be eager and show your interest. I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, you can go through an internship and you can sit in the office and not talk to anybody, or not let people know what you're really interested in. I know it's uncomfortable, and I know folks don't like doing it, but go knock on a door, ask a question, tell people what you really believe in and what you're really interested in, because when they see the passion in you, that's when, you find that mentor who wants to give you that, level of work and help back.
Great, thank you so much. So I think our panelists will be here for another minute at the conclusion if you have any questions you'd rather ask them one-on-one. But thank you so much to our audience for joining us here at ELI today and also on our online web. And thank you for your thoughtful questions. We hope you'll continue to think about the many varied roles and paths in environmental law and policy as you move forward in this sector. ELI's annual Summer School Series is a complimentary series to offer an introduction to the legal and policy foundations of environmental law in the United States. The series of brown bag seminars are taught by experts in their fields, and we hope you'll be able to join us for later sessions on the major environmental statutes, starting with NEPA, ESA, and Fundamentals of Environmental Law next Tuesday. Register for today for this and the other sessions on the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, TSCA, RCRA, CERCLA, and Land Use Law. We're so grateful for your participation in today's summer school, and I hope you'll join us for future programming. I want to extend a very special thank you to our fantastic panel, Colby, Margot, Natasha, Stacey, Dmitry, and Nicole. You're all outstanding leaders in the environmental field, and we're grateful you could share your paths and advice with us today. Thank you for lending your expertise to this panel. Thank you. Mine.